Alexandria. Ocasio-Cortez made one satisfying assumption that morning. She was facing a 73-year-old senator who probably still used a flip phone, 13 million Twitter followers, 8 million on Instagram, the undisputed queen of political social media versus some folksy grandfather from Louisiana who said things like, "That dog won't hunt." Her team had prepared devastating clips. Her lighting was perfect. This would be the viral moment that defined her week, maybe her month. What AOC didn't know was that John Kennedy had spent 30 years as a prosecutor before entering politics, that he had prepared for this hearing the way he once prepared murder cases, that those 5 black folders on his desk contained evidence her social media team had never anticipated. "Congresswoman," Kennedy drawled, arranging his documents with surgical precision, "I understand you're quite popular on the internet. 13 million followers, is that right?" AOC smiled, sensing familiar territory. "That's correct, Senator." "Well," Kennedy replied, opening the first folder, "let's see how many you have left when we're done here today." The fluorescent lights of the Hart-Senate office building cast harsh shadows across the marble corridors as staffers hurried past their whispered conversations, creating an electric tension that seemed to crackle through the air. Something unprecedented was happening on Capitol Hill, and everyone could feel it. "Emergency hearing called by Senator Kennedy," one aide breathlessly reported into her phone, her voice barely containing her excitement. "Nobody knows what he has, but sources are saying it's going to end careers, plural." In room 216, the same chamber that had witnessed countless political dramas over the decades, television crews scrambled to position their cameras for what was being billed as the most explosive congressional hearing in recent memory. The press gallery, usually half empty for routine committee meetings, was packed beyond capacity with reporters who had received cryptic notifications just hours earlier promising revelations that will reshape American progressive politics forever. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation as camera operators tested their equipment and sound technicians ran final checks. This wasn't going to be another mundane oversight hearing that would disappear into C-SPAN archives. Every instinct honed by decades of political coverage told the assembled media that they were about to witness something historic. At the witness table, Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana sat with the calm confidence of a man who had spent decades in courtrooms before entering politics. His trademark seersucker suit was pressed to perfection, his silver hair combed back in the style that had become his signature across conservative media. But it was what lay before him that commanded attention and sent whispers rippling through the chamber. 5 thick black folders, each marked with a simple white label reading, "Classified Evidence." The folders sat arranged in precise order, suggesting a methodical approach that promised systematic destruction rather than random political theater. Kennedy's hands rested calmly beside them, but his eyes carried the intensity of a prosecutor who had spent months preparing for the case of his career. The chamber fell into an expectant hush as the doors opened and Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez entered, flanked by a team of advisors whose nervous energy was palpable even from across the room. The woman who had once commanded social media with the confidence of a digital native who had stared down Fortune 500 CEOs in committee hearings with unwavering certainty now moved with visible hesitation that sent shockwaves through the assembled observers. Her usually perfect political composure showed hairline cracks that only someone looking for them would notice, hands that trembled slightly as she adjusted her blazer eyes that darted toward Kennedy's folders with obvious anxiety, and the makeup team that followed discreetly in her wake, a detail that suggested this was no ordinary congressional appearance but rather a high-stakes performance where image management was critical. "Ladies and gentlemen," Chairman Graham announced, his voice carrying the weight of historical moment as he called the hearing to order, "We convene today for a special oversight hearing regarding allegations of ethical violations, financial impropriety, and potential fraud involving a sitting member of Congress." The formal language couldn't disguise the magnitude of what was about to unfold. This wasn't routine oversight, this was political warfare conducted with the precision of legal proceedings. Kennedy's eyes met AOC's across the chamber, and for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, the fate of American progressive politics hung in the balance. 2 fundamentally different visions of American politics faced each other, the folksy authenticity of Louisiana conservatism versus the manufactured rebellion of progressive celebrity culture. Then Kennedy smiled, not the warm, grandfatherly expression he was known for during friendly interviews, but something colder, more predatory, the expression of someone who had prepared for this moment with the thoroughness of a career prosecutor building a case against organized crime. Chairman Graham, Kennedy began his Louisiana drawl, carrying perfectly to every corner of the packed room, each word precisely calibrated for maximum impact. For years, the American people have been told that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez represents the voice of working families, the champion of the downtrodden, the authentic leader of a new progressive movement that would finally bring real change to Washington. He paused, letting his words sink in as cameras captured every nuance of expression on both their faces, and reporters held their breath in anticipation of what would come next. Today, we're going to prove that every single word of that narrative is a carefully constructed lie designed to enrich and empower a privileged elite who has spent her entire career playing dress-up as a revolutionary while exploiting the very people she claims to represent. The folders before him seemed to pulse with potential energy, each one representing years of investigation, months of document collection, and what insiders were already calling the most comprehensive political takedown in modern American history. These 5 folders, Kennedy continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, carrying the moral authority of someone who had uncovered systematic deception, contain evidence of ethics violations that would shame a city councilman, policy positions that have damaged the very communities she claims to serve, an identity built entirely on lies about her background and values, digital manipulation that makes foreign election interference look amateur, and a pattern of deception so comprehensive that it represents a fundamental fraud perpetrated against the American people. AOC shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her usually commanding presence reduced to something smaller, more vulnerable. The woman who had built her brand on fearless confrontation with power now seemed to shrink under the weight of Kennedy's unwavering gaze and the implications of those 5 ominous folders. "By the time we're finished here today," Kennedy declared, his words carrying the finality of a judge's gavel, "the American people will understand that they have been sold a bill of goods by someone who represents everything that is wrong with modern politics, a fraud, a hypocrite, and a privileged elite, masquerading as the voice of the people while laughing all the way to the bank." As Kennedy reached for the first folder, his movements deliberate and theatrical, AOC's advisors leaned in for urgent whispered consultations. But their client seemed frozen, caught between the confidence that had carried her to national prominence and a growing realization that she was about to face something entirely unprecedented in her political experience. The reckoning had begun, and everyone in the chamber understood they were about to witness the systematic destruction of one of the most recognizable figures in American progressive politics. Kennedy opened the first folder with the deliberate precision of a surgeon making an incision. The silence in the chamber was absolute as he removed a thick stack of documents, each page tab-coded and marked with the official seal of the House Ethics Committee. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez," Kennedy began, his voice carrying the weight of undeniable authority. "Let's start with what might be the most perfect example of progressive hypocrisy in modern American politics: your infamous Tax the Rich dress at the 2021 Met Gala." The main monitor flickered to life, displaying the iconic image that had dominated news cycles 4 years earlier: AOC in her flowing white gown with bold red letters spelling out "Tax the Rich" as she posed on the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, surrounded by billionaires and celebrities in outfits worth more than most Americans earn in a year. "On its face," Kennedy continued, this appeared to be a bold political statement, a young congresswoman bringing class consciousness to an elite gathering. But as we'll see today, the reality tells a very different story. AOC straightened in her chair, attempting to project the confidence that had made her a progressive icon. "Senator Kennedy, I'm proud of that moment. I brought an important message about economic inequality to—" "Ma'am," Kennedy interrupted smoothly, "before you continue with your prepared talking points, let me share some facts that the American people haven't heard." He produced a document stamped with official House Ethics Committee seals. "This is the 26-page report released by the House Ethics Committee just last month, determining that your attendance at that gala violated federal ethics rules in multiple ways." The chamber stirred as Kennedy's words sank in. This wasn't ancient history, this was current ongoing scandal. According to this report, Kennedy read with prosecutorial precision, you impermissibly accepted gifts totaling over $3,700 in connection with your Met Gala appearance, including free admission for your partner and rental costs for apparel that were deliberately undervalued to circumvent ethics requirements. The monitor displayed the committee's findings rental costs paid by AOC $990.76 versus actual fair market value $3,724.04, a difference of nearly $3,000 that constituted an illegal gift under House rules. But here's where it gets interesting. Kennedy said, his voice taking on the tone of a storyteller building to a climax. This report also found evidence that the designer may have lowered costs in response to statements from your staff. AOC's face flushed red. Senator, the Ethics Committee acknowledged that I made good faith efforts to comply with all rules and good faith efforts. Kennedy's eyebrows shot up in theatrical disbelief. Congresswoman, let me share something that wasn't in the press releases about this report. He pulled out a series of text messages that appeared on the monitor, their authenticity verified by House investigators. The first was from AOC's chief of staff to the designer. The Congresswoman is fighting capitalism from within the system. Any discount you can provide helps the movement. The second, more damaging message came from the designer's team. She demanded we keep costs as low as possible because she's representing working people. We basically gave her the dress for free. The chamber erupted in gasps and murmurs. This wasn't just an ethics violation, it was evidence of calculated manipulation to secure illegal benefits while publicly promoting an anti-wealth message. Ma'am, Kennedy continued relentlessly, you wore a dress worth nearly $19,000 to an event where tickets cost $35,000 each, surrounded yourself with the very billionaires you claim to want to tax out of existence, and then used your supposed anti-capitalist credentials to pressure a small business owner into giving you illegal discounts. Kennedy reached into the folder again, this time producing AOC's own Instagram post from the night of the gala. The images showed her laughing and posing with known billionaires at exclusive after-party, champagne glasses in hand, designer jewelry glittering under the lights. These are your own social media posts from that evening, Kennedy noted. Here you are with pharmaceutical heiress Isabella Santos, whose family company you've publicly attacked. Here's another with tech billionaire Marcus Chen, whom you've accused of exploiting workers. And here, he paused for maximum effect, is a video of you toasting with real estate mogul Patricia Steinberg while discussing how exhausting it was to maintain your working-class image. AOC's hands were visibly shaking now. Those conversations were private and they've been taken completely out of context. Private conversations, Kennedy's voice rose with indignation. Ma'am, you posted these images yourself. You were so proud of rubbing shoulders with the elite that you broadcast it to your 13 million followers. He leaned forward, his next words delivered with devastating precision. But here's the part that really shows who you are. Congresswoman, according to the Ethics Committee report, you didn't actually pay for any of these expenses until after their investigation had already begun. You spent 2 years enjoying the benefits of illegal gifts while lecturing working families about the greed of the wealthy. The evidence was overwhelming, documented with a kind of meticulous detail that made denial impossible. Kennedy displayed payment records showing that AOC's team had delayed compensation to vendors for months, in some cases years, creating a pattern of financial benefit that violated federal law. Your own counsel admitted to the Ethics Committee that you ultimately paid over $10,000 of personal funds for that single evening, Kennedy continued. That's more than many of your constituents earn in months spent on one night of playing dress-up with billionaires while wearing a slogan that you clearly don't believe. AOC attempted to maintain composure, but her voice cracked as she responded, Senator, I was trying to bring an important message about inequality to whom? Kennedy interrupted, his voice rising with righteous anger. To billionaires who laughed at your message while you partied with them, to working families who watched you live like a celebrity while claiming to represent their interests. He pulled out the final piece of evidence from the first folder receipt showing AOC's personal expenses from that weekend, including a $500 makeup session, a $300 manicure, and a $1,200 hotel suite. Ma'am, you spent more on personal grooming for one evening than a minimum wage worker in your district earns in a month. You lived like a Hollywood celebrity while wearing a slogan about taxing the rich, then used your political position to avoid paying the full cost. Kennedy closed the first folder with theatrical finality. This isn't about attending a charitable event, Congresswoman. This is about a pattern of deception, telling working families you're fighting for them while living like the very elite you claim to oppose. AOC slumped slightly in her chair, the confidence that had carried her through countless committee hearings and media appearances visibly draining away. The woman who had built her brand on authentic connection with working Americans had just been exposed as someone who manipulated small business owners for personal benefit while partying with billionaires. The only class you represent, Kennedy concluded, his words carrying the weight of moral judgment, is the privileged elite who think they can fool hardworking Americans with costume changes and empty slogans. As whispers filled the chamber and cameras captured every moment of AOC's visible distress, it became clear that this was only the beginning. Kennedy still had 4 folders left, and if the first round was any indication, the American people were about to witness the complete dismantling of one of the most recognizable figures in progressive politics. The Met Gala scandal wasn't just about ethics violations. It was about the fundamental authenticity of the progressive movement itself. And based on the evidence Kennedy had just presented, that authenticity was as fictional as AOC's working-class persona. Kennedy's hand moved to the second folder with the deliberate calm of a chess master executing a long-planned strategy. The first round had established the pattern of deception. Now it was time to show how that deception had real-world consequences for American families. Congresswoman, Kennedy began, his voice carrying a new edge of moral authority, let's discuss your recent activities regarding immigration enforcement, specifically your Know Your Rights seminars that have caught the attention of federal law enforcement. The monitor displayed recent footage of AOC conducting what she called community education sessions in her district, teaching groups of undocumented immigrants how to avoid detection by ICE agents, how to refuse entry to law enforcement, and how to disappear into sanctuary jurisdictions when deportation proceedings began. Just 2 weeks ago, Kennedy continued, Border Czar Tom Homan stated that you were educating criminal illegal aliens and suggested that the Department of Justice is investigating whether your activities constitute obstruction of federal immigration enforcement. AOC straightened, sensing familiar ground where she had always felt confident in her moral position. Senator Kennedy providing legal education to vulnerable communities is protected under the First Amendment. I'm helping people understand their constitutional rights. Their constitutional rights. Kennedy's eyebrows shot up in theatrical surprise. Ma'am, are you referring to the constitutional rights of foreign nationals who have violated federal immigration law by entering this country illegally? The trap was set, and Kennedy could see AOC walking directly into it with the confidence of someone who had never been systematically challenged on her immigration positions. Every person on American soil has certain constitutional protections. AOC responded, her voice gaining strength as she moved into well-rehearsed talking points. Due process protection from illegal searches, the right to remain silent. I see, Kennedy interrupted smoothly. So you believe it's your duty as a member of Congress to help foreign nationals evade federal law enforcement. I believe it's my duty to protect human rights, Kennedy repeated, pulling a thick stack of documents from the second folder. Let's talk about human rights, Congresswoman. Specifically, let's talk about your record on protecting the human rights of the people you claim to be defending. The monitor suddenly displayed a video that sent shockwaves through the chamber. AOC's infamous 2019 statement comparing border detention facilities to concentration camps. Her voice filled with righteous indignation as she demanded immediate action to address what she called crimes against humanity. You called these facilities concentration camps, Kennedy noted, letting the inflammatory comparison hang in the air. You said the conditions were unconscionable, that immediate action was required to protect vulnerable people. AOC nodded clearly, believing she was on solid moral ground. I stand by those statements. The conditions were inhumane and then perhaps you can explain? Kennedy interrupted, his voice rising with calculated timing, why you voted against funding to improve those very same facilities. The trap snapped shut with devastating precision. Kennedy displayed AOC's voting record on the monitor, her consistent opposition to border security, funding her votes against facility improvements, her rejection of legislation that would have provided better housing, medical care, and legal processing for asylum seekers. Ma'am, you called these places concentration camps on Monday, then voted against giving them more resources on Tuesday. You preferred that vulnerable people suffer in inadequate conditions rather than give the Trump administration any legislative victory. The chamber fell silent as the full implications sank in. AOC had built her reputation on caring about immigrant welfare, but her own voting record showed she had repeatedly chosen political opposition over practical solutions. That's not, AOC stammered, her confidence evaporating as she realized the impossible position Kennedy had maneuvered her into. Not what Congresswoman. Kennedy pressed his voice, now carrying the full weight of prosecutorial authority. Not accurate. Let me show you something else. He produced Department of Homeland Security statistics showing border crossing numbers during the Biden administration, with a dramatic spike beginning in early 2021 as word spread that immigration enforcement had been relaxed. These numbers show a 400% increase in illegal border crossings during the current administration, Kennedy stated. Crossings that occurred after you and your colleagues spent years demonizing immigration enforcement and promising that there would be no consequences for illegal entry. The monitor displayed heartbreaking images: overcrowded facilities, children separated from families, dangerous desert crossings that had resulted in record numbers of deaths. The very humanitarian crisis AOC claimed to be fighting against had gotten dramatically worse under policies she supported. You're in Know Your Rights seminars, Kennedy continued relentlessly, aren't educating people about their constitutional protections. They're coaching criminal aliens on how to evade federal law enforcement and avoid deportation proceedings. He played audio recordings from AOC's recent seminars obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests. If ICE comes to your door, you don't have to let them in without a warrant. If they stop you on the street, you can remain silent. If they try to arrest you, demand to call these sanctuary city hotlines immediately. This isn't constitutional education, Kennedy declared, his voice rising with righteous anger. This is obstruction of justice. You're teaching people how to break federal law while claiming to protect their rights. AOC's response came out as barely a whisper. I was trying to protect vulnerable families from what? Kennedy interrupted. From following the same immigration laws that every other person who wants to live in America has to follow, from the same legal processes that brought your own family to this country. Kennedy pulled out his most devastating piece of evidence: statistics showing the real-world consequences of sanctuary city policies AOC had promoted. Crimes committed by individuals who had been released rather than deported families, destroyed by preventable tragedies, resources strained beyond capacity in border communities. Here's Maria Santos, Kennedy said, displaying a photograph of a young mother, killed by a drunk driver who had been deported 3 times but kept returning because activists like you taught him how to evade immigration enforcement. The image was devastating in its simplicity, a graduation photo of a young woman whose life had been cut short by the very policies AOC championed. Here's Tommy Chen, Kennedy continued, showing another photo. Age 8, killed in a hit-and-run by someone who was in the country illegally and knew he could disappear into a sanctuary jurisdiction if caught. AOC's face had gone pale, tears beginning to form in her eyes as the human cost of her policies was laid bare with photographic evidence. These families didn't matter to you, did they, Congresswoman? Kennedy's voice carried the weight of moral judgment. Their human rights didn't count because they weren't useful for your political narrative. He leaned forward, delivering his final blow. You called detention facilities concentration camps, then voted to keep them overcrowded. You claimed to care about immigrant welfare, then created policies that encouraged dangerous border crossings. You said you were protecting vulnerable people, then taught criminals how to evade the law. Kennedy displayed a final image, a side-by-side comparison of border facilities in 2019 versus 2024, showing dramatically worsened conditions under the policies AOC had advocated. The facilities you called concentration camps are now twice as overcrowded because your policies encouraged a massive surge in illegal crossings. The humanitarian crisis you claim to be solving has gotten exponentially worse because you chose political theater over practical solutions. AOC's voice cracked as she attempted a response. I was trying to fight for human dignity and— Whose human dignity? Kennedy's voice rose to fill the chamber. The dignity of foreign nationals who break our laws, or the dignity of American families who follow them? The dignity of criminal aliens who evade deportation, or the dignity of victims whose lives they destroy? The second folder closed with the same theatrical finality as the first, but the emotional impact was far more devastating. Kennedy hadn't just exposed policy disagreements, he had shown how AOC's immigration positions had led directly to preventable tragedies. You don't represent immigrants, Congresswoman, Kennedy concluded, his words carrying the weight of final judgment. You exploit them for political gain while making their lives more dangerous and the lives of American families expendable. As AOC sat in stunned silence, tears now openly streaming down her face, the chamber remained quiet except for the clicking of cameras capturing every moment of her public breakdown. The woman who had built her career on moral certainty about immigration had just been confronted with the consequences of her own policies and found herself unable to defend them. The immigration deception was complete, but Kennedy still had 3 folders remaining. If the pattern held, AOC's political career was about to suffer damage from which it might never recover. Kennedy approached the 3rd folder with the confidence of a prosecutor who could smell victory. The first 2 rounds had established a pattern of deception and policy failure. Now it was time to destroy the very foundation of AOC's political identity. This wasn't just about ethics violations or policy disagreements. This was about exposing the fundamental fraud at the heart of American progressive politics. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, Kennedy began, his voice carrying a new tone of philosophical contempt. You've built your entire political career on the claim that you're a democratic socialist fighting for working families against elite oppression. Today we're going to examine whether that identity has any basis in reality. He opened the 3rd folder and removed a document that made AOC visibly flinch, an official statement from the Democratic Socialists of America dated just 6 months earlier. This is a press release from the DSA, your own organization, announcing that they have withdrawn their endorsement of you. Kennedy read with devastating precision. According to their statement, you have failed to meet their standards for commitment to the movement and socialist principles. The monitor displayed the full DSA statement, highlighting the key passage. Representative Ocasio-Cortez's recent votes and statements demonstrate that she has prioritized mainstream democratic politics over genuine socialist transformation. We cannot in good conscience continue our endorsement. AOC shifted uncomfortably, knowing this was particularly damaging since the DSA had been her original launching pad to national politics. Senator, organizational endorsements come and go based on complex political calculations. Complex political calculations? Kennedy's voice dripped with disbelief. Ma'am, your own socialist organization has declared that you're not actually a socialist. They've essentially called you a fraud. He produced internal DSA communications obtained through congressional investigation powers, including emails that were even more damaging than the public statement. This email from DSA leadership describes you as a bourgeois fraud playing revolutionary, Kennedy read aloud. Another refers to your performative socialism designed to advance personal brand rather than worker interests. The words hung in the air like accusations from a tribunal. AOC's own political movement had not just abandoned her, they had actively denounced her as inauthentic. But let's examine why they might have reached this conclusion. Kennedy continued, pulling out a comprehensive background dossier that had clearly taken months to compile. You've spent your entire career promoting the narrative that you're a girl from the Bronx who represents working-class interests. Let's look at the facts. The monitor displayed a map of Westchester County, one of the wealthiest areas in New York State, with a specific address highlighted. You weren't raised in the Bronx, were you, Congresswoman? You were raised in Yorktown Heights in Westchester County, where the median household income is over $130,000 per year, nearly 3 times the national average. AOC's face flushed as Kennedy continued his systematic deconstruction of her carefully crafted biography. Your father wasn't a working-class hero struggling against the system. Sergio Ocasio was a successful architect who owned multiple properties and sent you to Boston University, where tuition currently costs over $60,000 per year. Kennedy pulled out financial records that painted a picture completely at odds with AOC's public persona. Your family owned investment properties in Florida. Your college education was fully funded without student loans. You lived in a luxury apartment building in the Bronx that costs more per month than most of your constituents earn. The revelation was devastating because it undermined the entire foundation of AOC's political appeal. She wasn't an authentic voice of working-class struggle. She was a privileged college graduate who had adopted working-class aesthetics for political advantage. The bartender job you're always talking about, Kennedy continued relentlessly. That was a brief period between college graduation and launching your political career, not a lifetime of working-class struggle. He displayed photographs from AOC's social media accounts during her bartending days, expensive clothes, luxury vacations, frequent meals at high-end restaurants. This wasn't someone struggling to pay rent. This was someone temporarily working in service while pursuing other opportunities. But let's look at how you've lived since becoming the voice of the working class. Kennedy said, opening a new section of documents that would prove even more damaging. The monitor displayed AOC's recent financial disclosures revealing assets and expenditures that seemed impossible to reconcile with her socialist rhetoric. Despite earning a congressional salary of $174,000 per year, you've somehow managed to afford a Tesla Model 3, a luxury electric vehicle that costs more than many of your constituents earn annually. Kennedy displayed photographs of AOC's Tesla complete with license plate and parking records, showing it regularly parked at high-end establishments throughout Washington and New York. You live in a luxury apartment building in D.C. that charges over $3,000 per month in rent. You wear designer clothes that cost more than minimum wage workers earn in months. You dine at restaurants where a single meal costs what food service workers make in a week. Each revelation built upon the last, creating an undeniable picture of someone who lived like a member of the elite while claiming to fight against elite privilege. Your favorite restaurant in D.C. is Le Bernardin, where the tasting menu costs $295 per person, Kennedy noted with theatrical precision. You've been photographed there 17 times in the past 2 years, often posting on social media about building the movement, while consuming meals that cost more than your constituents spend on groceries in a month. AOC attempted to defend herself. Senator members of Congress have certain social obligations, and my personal choices. Personal choices. Kennedy interrupted, his voice rising with indignation. Ma'am, you built your entire political brand on the idea that you understand working-class struggle because you've lived it. But every single aspect of your actual life demonstrates that you've been living like the elite you claim to oppose. Bye. Kennedy produced his most devastating evidence yet, credit card statements showing AOC's spending patterns over the past 3 years. $2,400 for a single shopping trip to Nordstrom, $1,800 for a weekend spa retreat, $5,200 for a vacation to Puerto Rico, staying at a resort that costs more per night than minimum wage workers earn per week. The numbers kept coming, each one more damaging than the last expensive cosmetic treatments. Designer handbags, first-class flights, luxury hotel stays. This wasn't someone living modestly while fighting for working families. This was someone living like a celebrity while using working-class rhetoric. Your own spending habits, Kennedy declared, represent everything that's wrong with elite progressive politics. You live like a millionaire while lecturing others about inequality. He moved to the policy implications of AOC's lifestyle choices, showing how her personal behavior contradicted her public positions. You promote the Green New Deal, which would eliminate millions of working-class jobs in traditional energy industries while driving a luxury electric vehicle that most working families could never afford. Kennedy displayed economic analyses showing how AOC's environmental policies would disproportionately harm the very communities she claimed to represent. You advocate for a 70% tax rate on high earners while using every available tax loophole to minimize your own obligations. You promote rent control policies that would reduce housing supply while living in luxury accommodations that benefit from market rate pricing. The policy contradictions were stark and undeniable. AOC promoted luxury beliefs, political positions that signaled moral superiority, but imposed costs primarily on working-class families while leaving the elite unaffected. Kennedy reached the climax of his assault on AOC's socialist credentials. You don't represent democratic socialism, Congresswoman. You represent what Vladimir Lenin called useful idiots, privileged elites who adopt revolutionary rhetoric to advance their personal interests while actual working people suffer the consequences of their policies. The historical reference was particularly cutting because it came from socialist theory itself, suggesting that even genuine socialists would view AOC as a fraud. The DSA was right to withdraw their endorsement. Kennedy concluded, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. You're not a socialist, you're a privileged elite playing dress-up as a revolutionary, living like a millionaire while lecturing working families about the evils of capitalism. AOC sat in stunned silence, her entire political identity systematically demolished by someone who had done his homework with prosecutorial thoroughness. The woman who had built her career on authentic connection with working Americans had been exposed as someone who lived like the very elite she claimed to oppose. You've lost the left because even socialists recognize you as a fraud, Kennedy said, closing the third folder with finality. You never had the center because your policies would destroy their livelihoods, and you certainly don't have the right because we see through performative politics. As tears streamed down AOC's face and her hands shook visibly, the chamber remained silent except for the relentless clicking of cameras. The progressive movement's brightest star had just been revealed as a carefully constructed illusion, and everyone present understood they were witnessing the end of a political phenomenon. Kennedy still had 2 folders remaining, but the damage was already catastrophic. AOC's fundamental credibility as an authentic voice of working-class Americans had been destroyed beyond repair. Kennedy's approach to the 4th folder carried the confidence of a general who could see total victory within reach. The previous rounds had systematically demolished AOC's credibility on ethics policy and identity. Now it was time to expose the mechanism through which she had built her political brand, the sophisticated social media operation that had transformed an unknown bartender into a national political phenomenon. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. Kennedy began, his voice carrying a new note of technological sophistication that surprised many in the chamber. You've often been called the most effective politician of your generation when it comes to social media communication. Your 13 million Twitter followers and 8 million Instagram followers have been cited as evidence of your authentic connection with young Americans. AOC straightened slightly, sensing familiar territory where she had always felt confident. Social media was her domain, the platform that had launched her career and sustained her relevance even when legislative achievements proved elusive. I'm proud of my ability to communicate directly with constituents and engage young people in the political process, she replied, her voice gaining some strength for the first time since the hearing began. I'm sure you are, Kennedy replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But let's examine whether that communication is as authentic as you claim. He opened the 4th folder and removed what appeared to be a comprehensive digital forensics report complete with data visualization charts and network analysis diagrams. This is a report commissioned by the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs analyzing the digital infrastructure behind your social media presence, Kennedy announced. The findings are illuminating. The monitor displayed complex network diagrams showing social media engagement patterns that immediately caught the attention of tech-savvy observers in the chamber. According to this analysis conducted by the same cybersecurity firm that investigates foreign election interference, approximately 40% of your Twitter followers show characteristics consistent with automated bot accounts. The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. Bot followers were a common tactic used by influencers and celebrities to artificially inflate their apparent popularity, but for a sitting member of Congress to potentially engage in such practices raised serious questions about authenticity. "That's absolutely false," AOC protested, her voice rising with indignation. "I've never purchased followers or engaged in any kind of artificial manipulation." "Ma'am," Kennedy interrupted smoothly, "I didn't say you purchased anything, but let's examine the evidence." He displayed a series of engagement analysis charts that told a disturbing story. AOC's follower growth showed suspicious patterns, massive spikes that coincided with specific political events, engagement rates that varied dramatically based on content type, and follower demographics that didn't match typical organic growth patterns. These charts show that your follower growth accelerated dramatically during certain political controversies, with engagement patterns that suggest coordinated amplification rather than organic interest. Kennedy explained with the precision of a data scientist. "More concerning," he continued, "is the timing of these spikes. They consistently occur within hours of controversial statements or actions, suggesting a sophisticated operation designed to create the impression of grassroots support for positions that might otherwise be unpopular." Kennedy produced internal congressional records that would prove even more damaging time-tracking reports from AOC's congressional staff. According to official House records, your congressional staff paid by taxpayers spend approximately 60% of their official work time on social media content creation, engagement, and digital strategy. The numbers were staggering and represented a fundamental misuse of congressional resources. While other members of Congress use their staff for constituent services, legislative research, and policy development, AOC's team was functioning as a taxpayer-funded digital marketing agency. Your chief digital strategist, paid $85,000 per year in taxpayer funds, spends less than 10% of their time on constituent services, Kennedy noted with obvious disapproval. The rest is devoted to content creation, trend analysis, and what internal emails describe as narrative management. He displayed examples of the sophisticated content strategy that AOC's team employed: coordinated posting schedules designed to maximize algorithmic visibility, carefully crafted messaging designed to generate viral engagement, and strategic controversy creation to maintain relevance during slow news cycles. "This isn't authentic communication with constituents," Kennedy declared. "This is professional influence peddling funded by taxpayers and designed to build your personal brand rather than serve your district." AOC attempted to defend her approach. "Social media allows me to reach young people who might not otherwise engage with politics." "Young people like these," Kennedy interrupted, displaying a series of screenshots from AOC's recent TikTok videos that had gone viral for all the wrong reasons. The videos were cringeworthy in their obvious pandering: AOC attempting to use youth slang incorrectly, participating in dance trends weeks after they had become passé, and delivering political messages with the forced enthusiasm of a corporate marketing campaign. These videos, which have been widely mocked, even by your supporters, as cringe content, represent the natural evolution of your approach to politics, Kennedy observed. Performance over substance, viral moments over genuine connection. He played clips of reaction videos from young creators who had responded to AOC's content with secondhand embarrassment, noting how her attempts to appear authentic had the opposite effect. "Here's 22-year-old Maria Rodriguez, a progressive activist from your own district, explaining why your TikTok content makes her want to crawl under a rock," Kennedy said, playing audio that was devastating in its generational authenticity. "She's trying so hard to be relatable that she's completely unrelatable," the young woman's voice explained. "It's like watching your mom try to use slang she learned from TV. We can see through it, and it makes us trust her less, not more." Kennedy moved to even more damaging evidence records showing how AOC's social media operation had been used to generate revenue streams that blurred the line between public service and personal enrichment. Your social media following has been leveraged to secure book deals worth over $1 million, speaking engagements that pay up to $100,000 per appearance, and brand partnerships that would be impossible without your congressional platform, Kennedy noted. He displayed contracts and payment records that showed how AOC had monetized her political fame in ways that raised serious ethical questions about the use of public office for private gain. You've essentially built a media company using congressional resources, then profited from the audience you developed while being paid by taxpayers to serve your constituents. Kennedy reached his most devastating evidence: internal communications, showing how AOC's team had deliberately manufactured controversies to maintain social media relevance. These internal emails show your staff strategically planning controversial statements designed to generate viral engagement. Kennedy read from documents that had been obtained through congressional oversight powers. This email from your communications director states, "We need another Twitter moment this week," suggested targets oil companies, billionaires, or Republican hypocrisy, anything that gets us trending and builds the brand. Calculation behind AOC's seemingly spontaneous political outrage was laid bare in black and white, showing a level of cynical manipulation that contradicted her image as an authentic voice of moral conviction. Your entire social media presence, Kennedy declared, is a carefully orchestrated performance designed to build your personal brand rather than advance genuine political change. He displayed engagement metrics that showed how AOC's most viral content was consistently her most divisive, suggesting that her team had optimized for controversy rather than constructive political dialogue. You've discovered that outrage generates more engagement than policy solutions, that personal attacks trend better than legislative achievements, and that performance activism is more profitable than actual governance. Kennedy reached his climax. You're not a legislator congresswoman, you're an influencer who happens to hold office. You've turned the United States Congress into your personal content creation studio funded by taxpayers who thought they were hiring a public servant. He displayed AOC's legislative record alongside her social media metrics, showing an inverse relationship between viral content and actual policy achievements. 13 million followers but zero major legislative victories, billions of impressions but no significant bills passed. Viral moments that number in the hundreds but constituent services that rank among the lowest in Congress. The indictment was complete and devastating. AOC hadn't just failed to leverage her massive platform for effective governance, she had actively chosen social media performance over substantive public service. Your followers aren't constituents, Kennedy concluded, closing the fourth folder with finality. They're customers in a personal branding operation that you've built using taxpayer resources and congressional authority. As AOC sat in stunned silence, her entire political methodology exposed as an elaborate performance art project, the chamber buzzed with the realization that they had witnessed something unprecedented: the complete deconstruction of modern political celebrity culture. Kennedy had one folder remaining, but the damage was already beyond repair. AOC's credibility as both an authentic voice and an effective legislator had been systematically destroyed, leaving only the question of what final revelations might be contained in the fifth and final folder. Kennedy approached the final folder with the deliberate ceremony of a judge preparing to deliver a death sentence. The previous 4 rounds had systematically demolished every aspect of AOC's public persona, her ethics, her policies, her identity, and her methods. Now it was time to connect all these revelations into an indictment so comprehensive that it would end not just her career, but serve as a warning about the dangers of performative politics in American democracy. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. Kennedy began, his voice carrying the weight of historical judgment. We've spent the last several hours examining different aspects of your political career: ethics violations, policy failures, identity fraud, and digital manipulation. But what we haven't discussed is how all of these elements work together to represent something far more dangerous than individual failings. AOC sat slumped in her chair, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. Tears had left streaks in her makeup. Her hands trembled visibly, and her voice had been reduced to barely audible whispers. The transformation from confident progressive icon to broken political figure was complete, but Kennedy wasn't finished. You see, ma'am, what you represent isn't just personal hypocrisy, though there's certainly plenty of that. What you represent is the complete corruption of American progressive politics by privileged elites who treat working-class struggle as a costume to be worn for political advantage. Kennedy opened the final folder and removed what appeared to be a master timeline, a comprehensive document that connected every scandal, every contradiction, and every deception into a single devastating narrative. This timeline, Kennedy announced, shows that none of what we've discussed today was accidental. Every aspect of your political persona was carefully calculated and deliberately constructed to exploit the genuine frustrations of working Americans for your personal benefit. The monitor displayed a chronological progression that was damning in its precision. It began with AOC's privileged upbringing in Westchester County and followed her through college, her brief period of bartending, and her transformation into a political phenomenon. The pattern becomes clear when you see it laid out systematically, Kennedy explained. A privileged college graduate realizes that authentic working-class credentials are politically valuable, so she constructs a fictional biography designed to exploit class consciousness for career advancement. Kennedy pointed to specific decision points in AOC's timeline where authentic choices could have been made but were instead replaced with calculated political theater. Here, he said, indicating a point in 2018, you could have run on your actual background as an educated professional with policy ideas. Instead, you chose to emphasize the bartending job and minimize your privileged upbringing. Here, he continued, moving to 2019, you could have used your platform to promote practical solutions to immigration challenges. Instead, you chose inflammatory rhetoric that made problems worse while building your personal brand. And here, he said, reaching 2021, you could have attended the Met Gala as a successful politician making a genuine statement. Instead, you turned it into a performance art piece while accepting illegal benefits and partying with the very people you claim to oppose. Each data point on the timeline connected to the others, creating an undeniable picture of systematic deception spanning years. But the most damaging revelation, Kennedy continued, is contained in these documents obtained through congressional oversight powers. He produced a series of internal communications that would prove to be the final nail in AOC's political coffin strategic planning documents from her first congressional campaign that explicitly outlined the persona she would adopt. This is a memo from your original campaign consultants dated 3 months before you announced your candidacy. Kennedy read with prosecutorial precision. The candidate's privileged background must be minimized while emphasizing working-class elements. The bartending job should be portrayed as representative of her entire work experience rather than a brief transitional period. The document continued with even more damaging strategic recommendations. Emphasize Bronx residents while downplaying Westchester upbringing. Use working-class rhetoric even when discussing policies that primarily benefit educated professionals. Create authentic moments through carefully planned, spontaneous events. AOC's entire political identity had been focus grouped and market-tested like a consumer product, with every aspect of her authentic persona deliberately constructed by political consultants. Your authenticity, Kennedy declared, was literally manufactured by the same type of political consultants you claim to oppose. Your working-class identity was a product created by the political establishment you pretend to fight. Kennedy moved to the financial implications of AOC's political performance, displaying records that showed how her manufactured authenticity had been converted into personal wealth. Since taking office, you've leveraged your political fame into book deals worth over $1 million, speaking fees that reach 6 figures per appearance, and brand partnerships that have made you wealthy while claiming to fight inequality. The numbers were staggering. AOC had transformed her congressional salary into a multimedia empire worth millions, all built on the fabricated foundation of working-class authenticity. You've become exactly what you claim to oppose, Kennedy observed with devastating accuracy. A member of the elite class who profits from political division while working families suffer the consequences of your policies. Kennedy reached his most comprehensive indictment. But the real damage you've done isn't to yourself or even to your constituents. The real damage is to the concept of authentic political representation itself. He displayed polling data showing how AOC scandals had affected public trust in progressive politics more broadly. Young Americans who believed in your message are now more cynical about political engagement. Working families who trusted your advocacy now doubt whether any politician genuinely represents their interests. The progressive movement itself has been set back years by your fraudulent representation of its values. Kennedy's voice rose with moral authority as he delivered his final assault. You haven't just failed as a politician congresswoman. You've damaged the very possibility of authentic political change by proving that even the most seemingly genuine political movements can be corrupted by self-interested elites. He displayed images from recent protests where progressive activists carried signs reading AOC sold out and fake socialist, showing how AOC's base had turned against her. Your own supporters now view you as a symbol of everything wrong with American politics. The Democratic Socialists who launched your career have expelled you from their organization. The working families you claim to represent have realized you are exploiting their struggles for personal gain. Kennedy closed the timeline and faced AOC directly for his final statement. You came to Congress claiming to represent a new generation of authentic political leadership. Instead, you've proven that the corruption of American politics runs so deep that even its supposed reformers are frauds. AOC was openly sobbing now, her entire political identity reduced to ruins around her. When she attempted to speak, her voice came out as barely a whisper. I tried to fight for working people. I believed in the cause. Did you? Kennedy's response cut through her protest like a sword. Or did you see an opportunity to advance your career by exploiting the genuine suffering of families who trusted you to represent their interests? Kennedy gathered his materials with theatrical finality. The evidence we've presented today shows a pattern of deception spanning your entire political career. Ethics violations that demonstrate your belief that rules don't apply to you, policy positions that harm the very people you claim to help, an identity built on lies about your background and values, and a political operation designed to profit from division rather than create genuine change. He stood to face the chamber. But perhaps most damaging of all, you've proven that American progressive politics has been captured by the same type of privileged elites who have always controlled the system, people who see working-class struggle as a political opportunity rather than a moral imperative. Kennedy's final words carried the weight of historical judgment. You don't represent the failure of one politician, Congresswoman. You represent the failure of a political movement that allowed itself to be led by someone who was fundamentally dishonest about who she was and what she believed. As Kennedy closed the final folder, the chamber fell into complete silence except for AOC's quiet sobbing. The woman who had entered the hearing as one of the most recognizable figures in American politics was leaving as a cautionary tale about the dangers of performative activism and manufactured authenticity. The American people deserve better than frauds like you, Kennedy concluded. They deserve representatives who actually believe in the values they espouse, who actually share the experiences they claim to understand, and who actually work for solutions rather than social media engagement. The destruction was complete. AOC's career, her movement, and her legacy had been systematically dismantled by someone who had done his homework and come prepared to expose every lie, every contradiction, and every moment of hypocrisy that had built her political empire. As cameras captured her final moments of public humiliation, it became clear that this hearing would be remembered not just as the end of AOC's career, but as the moment when American politics began to demand authentic representation over performative activism. Kennedy had achieved something unprecedented, the complete destruction of a political phenomenon in real time, broadcast live to a nation that had been waiting for someone to finally hold their representatives accountable for the gap between their rhetoric and their reality. The silence that followed Kennedy's closing statement lasted exactly 14 seconds, an eternity, in political time that was broken only by the explosion of activity as reporters frantically began typing, cameras swiveled to capture reactions, and social media erupted with a force that would reshape American political discourse. Within minutes, AOC exposed was trending worldwide, but this wasn't the usual political theater that dominated news cycles for a few days before fading into memory. This was different. This was the kind of systematic destruction that ended careers and changed the trajectory of political movements. The immediate reaction in the chamber was unprecedented. Republican members who had witnessed the hearing sat in stunned silence, many appearing shocked by the comprehensiveness of Kennedy's presentation. Even veteran politicians who had seen decades of scandals and investigations seemed unprepared for the methodical demolition they had just witnessed. Democratic members faced an impossible choice: defend a colleague who had been exposed as fundamentally dishonest, or distance themselves from someone who had become a liability to the entire progressive movement. The silence from the Democratic side of the chamber spoke volumes about their decision. CNN's initial coverage captured the moment perfectly. What we've witnessed today appears to be the most comprehensive political takedown in modern congressional history. The evidence presented by Senator Kennedy was so detailed, so methodical, and so devastating that it's difficult to see how Representative Ocasio-Cortez could possibly recover politically. Even MSNBC, typically sympathetic to progressive politicians, was forced to acknowledge the magnitude of the revelations. The documents and recordings presented today raise serious questions, not just about Representative Ocasio-Cortez's individual conduct, but about the authenticity of the progressive movement she has come to symbolize. Fox News, predictably, was less restrained. Today we witnessed the greatest political takedown in Senate history. Senator Kennedy didn't just expose AOC as a fraud, he exposed the entire progressive movement as being led by privileged elites who cosplay as working-class revolutionaries. But perhaps most telling was the reaction from AOC's own base. Progressive Twitter, typically her most reliable source of support, was in complete meltdown. The hashtag #ProgressiveBetrayal began trending alongside #AOC exposed, with former supporters expressing feelings of betrayal and disillusionment. "I defended her for years," wrote Sarah Martinez, a progressive activist from the Bronx. "I thought she was one of us. Finding out she was just another privileged politician playing dress-up makes me sick." The Democratic Socialists of America issued an emergency statement within 2 hours of the hearing's conclusion. "The revelations presented today confirm our recent decision to withdraw endorsement from Representative Ocasio-Cortez. The evidence suggests a pattern of behavior fundamentally incompatible with socialist values and working-class solidarity." More damaging was the response from labor unions that had previously supported AOC. The Service Employees International Union released a statement expressing deep concern about the revelations, while the American Federation of Teachers announced they were reviewing their relationship with the Congresswoman. In Louisiana, Kennedy's approval ratings soared to unprecedented heights. Polling conducted within 48 hours of the hearing showed his approval rating at 89% among Republicans and 34% among Democrats, numbers that immediately sparked presidential speculation. John Kennedy didn't just expose AOC today, observed political analyst David Broder. He established himself as the conscience of American conservatism. The way he systematically demolished her arguments while maintaining his dignity and folksy charm was masterful political theater. Kennedy's phone began ringing with calls from major donors, conservative organizations, and Republican power brokers across the country. The hearing had transformed a regional senator into a national political figure with serious presidential potential. For AOC, the aftermath was catastrophic. Her congressional office was flooded with calls demanding her resignation. Staff members faced with an untenable situation began submitting resignations within hours. Her social media accounts, typically active with multiple posts per day, went completely silent. The silence was more damaging than any response could have been. It suggested someone who had been so thoroughly destroyed that even her legendary social media skills couldn't construct a defense. Within a week, three primary challengers had announced campaigns against AOC, sensing political opportunity in her weakness. More significantly, progressive donors who had funded her campaigns began publicly distancing themselves from her candidacy. "We believed we were supporting an authentic voice for working families," explained Maria Rodriguez, a major Democratic donor. "Learning that we were actually funding a privileged elite's performance art project is deeply disturbing." The broader implications for progressive politics were immediate and severe. Other members of the squad found themselves facing increased scrutiny as voters began questioning whether the entire progressive movement had been captured by inauthentic political actors. Polling showed that support for progressive policies like the Green New Deal and Medicare for All declined significantly in the weeks following the hearing as AOC's exposure as a fraud called into question the credibility of the entire movement she had come to symbolize. Perhaps most significantly, the hearing had established a new standard for political accountability. Kennedy's methodical approach using documented evidence, official reports, and AOC's own words against her provided a template for how to effectively challenge performative politicians. The transformation was complete. In a single afternoon, Kennedy had ended AOC's political career, damaged the progressive movement she represented, and established himself as a national conservative leader. More importantly, he had demonstrated that authentic political representation could triumph over manufactured political celebrity. As AOC retreated from public view and Kennedy basked in national acclaim, the broader lesson was clear. American voters were hungry for genuine political leadership and willing to reject even the most carefully constructed political personas when they were revealed to be built on lies. The era of performative activism had suffered a fatal blow, and the demand for authentic representation had found its champion in an unlikely figure, a folksy Louisiana senator who had proven that truth properly presented could still triumph over political theater in American democracy. The reckoning was complete, and American politics would never be quite the same.